Hello, welcome back to the Heumann Perspective. Today we're going to be interviewing Arlene Kanter, who is a professor of law at Syracuse, and I will look at my notes. She's also the founder and director of the College of Law Disability Law and Policy program, which during our discussion you'll learn more about. Welcome to the program, Arlene.
Thank you, Judy. It's great to be here.
So give us a little bit of information about who you are.
Who am I? Well, these days, as you say, I'm a professor at Syracuse, but obviously there's more to it, I guess, right?
How did you get into disability
Yeah,
or
well,
law
I grew up.
disability?
I grew up outside of Boston, and when I was growing up, just to set it kind of the context, it was a day of segregation, right? It was before even Brown versus Board of Education was decided, and the Rehabilitation Act. None of that had happened yet. When I went to school, we didn't see kids with disabilities in my school, except maybe in some room down in the basement.
Special classes.
Special classes. And I remember, too, actually going down to Florida to visit my grandparents and seeing whites only, Negroes only, bathrooms and water fountains. And I still remember that well. But it's not as if people with disabilities were segregated. They were just invisible. Mm-hmm. And one summer, I ended up at a school working as a summer camp called the Fernald Summer Camp.
In Massachusetts.
And Fernald was in Waltham, Massachusetts. It was one of the I think it was one of the first, actually, residential institutions for people with developmental disabilities. It started the eugenics movement. They did sterilizations, they did radiation therapy, and it, believe it or not, did not close until 2015. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, working there, I had a great time. Made a lot of friends and never could understand why I went to go home and have dinner with my family and they didn't. Really never understood it.
How old were you then?
I was in middle school, I think like junior high school, maybe high school even. I worked there for a few summers and it really was fun. It's not as if it bothered me. But as I began processing the civil rights movement, in which I became pretty involved in terms of women's rights, I kept thinking that I'm working in a prison, I'm working on women's rights issues, and what's happening to those people who were abandoned by the state, by their families? I mean, really. And I decided I wanted to do disability rights law, and people looked at me like, what?
What is disability rights law?
There was no disability rights law. And I tell my students these days that when I started, there were no case books, there were no case, and now there's competing case books, and they're all wonderful, right? So I don't know how I decided, but for me, that was the civil rights issue that just never got talked about.
When did you go to Syracuse?
I came to Syracuse in 1988, and a big reason I came there is I had worked with Doug Bicklin and Steve Taylor and the Center for Human Policy when I was a lawyer at the Mental Health Law Project in Washington, which is now the Bazelon Center.
Doug and Steve were two of the champions on the inclusion of disabled people, and I think particularly they were focusing on individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, getting people out of institutions and really trying to change the culture of what people thought about people who had intellectual disabilities.
And the Center for Human Policy, I mean, that legacy is still so important because it really was the first university-based activist institute.
They have a number of posters that I think are still available. One of them is labeled Jars, Not People.
Yep. I have it right in my office. There it is. I mean, there are just so many firsts that came out of that center. And Steve and Doug and Bob Bogdan, who also then followed up with a couple books in photography, but they were the leaders in some ways of even the movement that we can say began with getting rid of the R word. I mean, it really, all that stuff happened there.
I think one of the other important parts of the work that was going on at that point at Syracuse, and I think TASH started around that time, which is an organization that started out with professionals who were recognizing, like you, that institutions and segregated schools, etc., were bad. But also the self-advocacy movement was really given support, particularly for people with intellectual disabilities. And I think that's been really essential over the last couple of decades. So you've moved on, when you went to Syracuse, to becoming a professor. And I think Syracuse at that time was really becoming an institution that was known for inclusion, not just in separate programs, but becoming a university that was really looking at what needed to be done to effectively include disability and disabled people in the subject matter. So when you look from 1988 to today, what do you see as some of the changes that have occurred at Syracuse and at some other institutions now? But let's just focus on Syracuse.
Right. I mean, I'd start with Syracuse, but I'd say that Syracuse was, again, the first in certain areas, but thank goodness it's not the only now.
Right.
So I just want to say that. But it was the first graduate program in disability studies. But when I came in 1988, I remember I taught a course called Mental Health Law again. And I had students from around the university, actually. It wasn't just law students. And the conversations were so important because the role of law was still just developing. And yet there was this expertise in all these other areas that we could work together. And that's something that I have to say, I'm proud to say that we've continued. And I certainly continue in all of my classes.
Give an example.
I teach a course called International Human Rights and Comparative Disability Law. Last year, I think we had about 11 countries represented, students from 11 different countries, and students from 5 different colleges. There are students from architecture, from international relations, women's studies, geography, social work, education. And we have joint degree programs that we started between the law school and the School of Education, for example. And our students graduate with 2 degrees. And I have to say, I'm proud to say, that they are working as disability rights lawyers. So Syracuse has done a lot. I think we've helped move the field in terms of advocacy and also the relationship between scholarship and activism. I mean, that's who we are. That's how I was raised. You can do your writing and you can teach, but in the end, you're an activist. And I think that model is dying, unfortunately, because for me, it's all about justice. And it's a justice movement. And I think Syracuse has done a lot, but I want to say that we have still a long way to go.
So how has the work that you've been doing and others on campus, how has it affected your teaching?
Oh, in so many ways.
As a professor.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, but as a person, I don't separate them. I mean, the students are in my house. They're not just in my class. And talking about disability is one thing, but being in a class of people with and without disabilities is critical for really any discussion that's going to be informed. So it's not just how I write my articles and think of things, it's how do we recruit students with disabilities to be parts of our community, because that's the important part to me.
And how has it changed? And the methods of how you teach?
It's changed the method in several ways. I'll give you an example. The first time I had a student, Court, who's now a lawyer in Pennsylvania doing disability rights work, he was blind, and he asked me if I could please send my PowerPoints to him the day before so that he could look at them, read them through JAWS, and then not have to worry about doing that while I'm talking and people are speaking in class. So I said, sure. And then I realized, well, if I'm giving it to him too, then why not give it to the whole class and then really think about what I'm doing with this PowerPoint? It made me so much more conscious of how I use PowerPoints, for whose benefit, and how they can be accessible to everyone. And because it made me a better teacher, instead of in the shower that morning kind of thinking what's going to be in my PowerPoint, I had to think, I had 24 hours to think about it. And every time I see him, which I try to do, I remind him that I think he's helped me make me into a better teacher.
You have played an important role with the CRPD, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Just a little question. How do you feel the CRPD is helping to change the rights of disabled people around the world?
I think I just finished an article about this very issue and why it should be happening here in the United States and ratified in so many ways. Number one, it's given a voice. It's given visibility. It's given power to people with disabilities. And that's what has to happen. Lawyers like me and others who have access to information, we can be a resource, but it's not our story. We're there for support, as an ally, as an advocate. But the CRPD in different countries, I've seen it. I've seen it on the ground, is really giving people with disabilities the feeling that they have a right to be at the table, maybe for the first time. And that their kids, when they're born, are not going to just be ending up in some institution or without any dignity. It gives them hope.
So, unfortunately, we are again out of time. I really want to thank you for being with us. Yes. And we're going to have some links up that you can look to Arlene's work. She's a scholar, but I think you'll see her work is really having a powerful impact. So let me conclude by saying, please tell your stories, encourage others to tell their stories, and I look forward to being with you again. Have a good day.